Hey everybody, welcome to Untitled Board Game Reviews. This video is part of a video series looking at Viae Roads of Rome. Now, Viae Roads of Rome is an area control war game, and in this video I'm going to teach you how to play the game. If you just want to get a quick overview, see some sample gameplay, or see my actual review of the game, check out the other videos in the series. In this specific video, I'm just going to teach you how to play the game. My goal of this video is that you can watch this video, bring the game home, pop it on the table, and start playing with your friends. So let's go in and set everything up and show you exactly how to play the game. Now, at the start of the game, every single player needs to get a cohort board. Now, these cohort boards are double layered, which means they do have an indentation for all your pieces. Every player needs to get their influence cube. Every player is going to get one player marker and a second player marker for their turn overview. Those player markers are going to be played on the board. Every single player needs to get 5 of the legions, which are going to put on these individual slots. You know which slots get the 5 individual legions because they start off as red to show you which individual 5 you're going to get. You get your first officer token over here in a slot, and your second officer token over here in a slot. You tell the difference between your 2 officer tokens because one has 2 levels, the other one has 3 levels, again representing the amount of gold you have to spend when you save those officers at the end of your turn. Every player is going to start with 8 stone, and they're also going to start off with 12 dinar. Now, this section right here is where you're going to send your Legio or your legions. Every time you do an attack action, they're going to be sent over here to this location, and any of your legions are going to be doing road building actions and go to this location on your board. Once every player has their cohort board set up, we're ready to begin. The only thing every single player needs to do is they need to get 2 mandate cards, and now the mandate cards are going to be objectives that every single player is privately working towards. The way you're going to win this game is by having the most influence at the end of the game. The way you're going to end the game, though, is as soon as one player manages to complete 3 mandate cards. Now, every single player is going to start with 2 mandate cards that are hidden that no other player knows about. The interesting thing about this, though, is that any player can complete a mandate card, but only you can score your own personal mandate cards, and every single mandate card is worth 2 points. At the end of the game, players are also going to gain victory points for every single point of influence they have, and players are also going to gain victory points for every single city they control on the board. So your total amount of victory points at the end of the game is going to be your influence, how many of mandate cards you've completed, and how many buildings you have on the map. Now, do note the winner of the game is the person with the most combined victory points from influence between the mandates, the buildings, and the personal influence track. But the game is going to come to an end once one player has completed 3 mandates personally, whether it's their own personal mandates or the open mandates that are open to all the players for all the players to work against. We'll explain all those when we get to that. Just understand that's how the way the game is going to end. Now, every single player again gets their cohort board with their player marker, their legions, their 2 officer cubes, 8 stone, 12 dinar, and their influence tracker, which starts at number 1. Now, your influence can never go to 0 or to negative, so you can never spend influence into a 0 or below. If you only have 1 influence, you can't spend anymore, and your influence can never go past 10. It doesn't wrap around, so it's a 1 to 10 scale. It doesn't drop below 1, never goes above 10. After each player has a cohort board, the next thing we are going to deal out is every single player gets 2 deception cards, except the last player in player order, they're going to get a 3rd deception card. Every single player is going to get 2 mandate cards. Again, these are hidden mandate cards. Don't show the other players your mandates because they don't need to know what cards you're working towards for victory. And remember, if you can trick them through guile, through deception, or just playing very smartly, if you can force them to complete your mandates, you get the victory points. They don't. And remember, once 3 mandates are completed by any one single player, the game is going to come to an end. And whoever has the most victory points through influence from the board and also from the cohort will be the grand winner of the game. Once every single player has their own personal cohort area set up with all their playing pieces, their mandate cards, and their deception cards, whether it's 2 deception cards or the final player getting 3 deception cards, we need to lay out the open mandate cards. Now, these mandate cards are the mandates that all the players can work on, and they are on a first come, first served basis. The first person to complete that mandate card is the one who's going to claim it, and again, every one of these is worth 2 victory points in the game. Now, there's a couple different versions of these mandate cards. There are conquer mandate cards, which is going to trigger the moment somebody puts their last piece in a certain area, and whoever puts the last piece in the area is one who actually conquered the area. So if you happen to be a player who has conquered these 2 cities right here, and a 3rd player moves in and conquers this region, they're the one who's going to get the conquest. So it's, again, you have to watch how you're playing your actions on this turn, because the person who gets the conquest is the one who gets to score the mandate card. Other area cards are going to tell you to control certain areas. The first person to control those 3rd areas, the moment they're controlled, is the person who gets to score that mandate card. And there's other mandate cards such as controlling roads or requiring you to do different specific actions. But just understand, once a mandate is completed, it's completed for the rest of the game, even if the conditions for the mandate card itself are no longer valid. So if you happen to lose areas or things change or the board mutates, the status of the board changes anyway, you're not going to lose your mandate cards. And once a mandate has been completed, you're going to place it face up in your area, even if it's your own personal mandate. You're going to flip it over, show that you completed the mandate, and lets everybody know that the game is going to be one step closer to ending. Anyways, the amount of mandates that are going to be displayed on the board in the open area is equal to the number of players plus 2 mandates. So that means in a 2-player game, we're going to have 4 mandates. In a 4-player game, which is what I'm showing you how to set up right now, we're going to have 6 of the mandates that are open. Next, we're going to shuffle the Fortuna decks, or the Fortune decks. I'm not going to butcher this wonderful language, so I'm going to try to say these cards in a normal way so I don't make a fool of myself here. You have the officer cards, and then finally you're going to have the deception cards. After you set up all these things, the next thing we need to decide is we need to decide player order. Now you decide player order by rolling dice. Whoever gets the most swords gets to place their player order. You can go to fisticuffs, you can duel by swords, you can pull out tasers. Well, probably not tasers, somebody might get hurt. But whatever play order you decide, that's what you're going to do. And you're simply going to place out the player order over here on the player order track. Now the way the player order track is, the pawn who is furthest to the left is a player who gets to go first, and then we're going to go from left to right in the player order. Do note that the higher levels of player order do cost money. The first player order, the highest one, costs 8, second is 5, third, and finally 1. Do understand that in a 5-player game, if you're forced to take the 1 dinar spot, if you're placing your pawn there because you're forced to go there, you don't pay the 1 dinar cost. It's only if you actually pick that spot. So in a 5-player game, if the other players get ahead of you and pick the free spots before you, you don't have to pay for that spot, and you don't pay for the spots at the beginning of the game either. So you can put the pawns all the way up here and track them that way, or down here. I like to do it here because it makes it a little bit more sense as I'm teaching the game. After you're done with that, you're simply going to put the round marker on round number 1. Place the basilicas out in easy access for all the players. Place the hostility markers, the dinar coins, and the dice out for easy reach for all the players. And now that everything's set up, the only thing we need to do is we need to reveal which officers are going to be available for all the players. Now this officer track is going to list a couple different things. I'll explain it when we purchase officers. It's not relevant right now, so we'll skip right past this really quick. Once this is done, we're not going to draw any fortune cards yet. I'll show you when that'll happen, and we're not going to have any more deception cards because we have our deception hands. Only thing left to do is for all the players to start out on the board in SPQR, which is the area that all the players are going to start in. Understand that in SPQR, nobody can conquer any locations, nobody can steal any locations, and matter of fact, the roads, which I'll explain a little bit, also are going to work a little bit differently. But understand, SPQR works differently from other areas of the board, but what I'm trying to say here is the first thing we need to do is in player order, every single player is going to pick 1 city to conquer or to control at the beginning of the game, and they're going to pick 1 road to control. Again, this is going to be free of cost, and they're simply going to place their player marker on top of their fort to show their first city that they are going to start with influence. We are simply going to do this in player order, every player taking 1 of the red cities, and that is going to judge where they can influence. Again, they put 1 fort, 1 road, and their player marker out on top. And again, yellow will be next. They will pick their city. And the locations you're going to pick are also going to be based on the strategies, based on the mandate cards you have, the mandates that are available, and different decisions you're going to want to make. So you want to make sure you're placing these out in as an intelligent way as possible. Make sure you're working towards your own mandates, your own victory, and your grand influence to control the grand game itself. The game of Viae is going to play out over rounds, and every single round is going to go through a process. During this process, players are going to get resources. Players are going to take actions. Players are going to recycle their hands. Players are going to pay for their resources. Players are going to gain and lose resources based on the resources they're able to pay for. And then at the end of the round, we're going to recycle the deception deck through the discard pile and shuffle it all back in and start the next round. The game is going to continue on, and again, even though the track here for the rounds goes all the way to 12 rounds, the game does not come to at the end of 12 rounds. The only way the game is going to end is when 1 player manages to complete 3 mandates. This is very rarely ever going to take 12 rounds, so don't even worry about it. But do understand that for some reason you have some not very aggressive players, or players are just hemming and hawing, it is possible to go to round 12, and again, that doesn't end the game. The only way the game ends is when that 3rd mandate is controlled by 1 single player. So the start of every single round, there's a nice amount of references all over the board to help you remember how the game plays. So I was going to point those out so you know where to look as you're playing the game. But at the start of every single round, you're going to have the fortune phase. Now the fortune phase during the very first round doesn't happen. It doesn't happen until the third round. And I'll explain how that works just now. So let's go ahead and skip past that. But basically what's going to happen on the fortune round is we're going to advance the round token and a couple different things are going to happen. But again, that's not going to happen in the first round, so let's go ahead and skip past that. We'll come back to that in just a little bit. The next thing going to happen is we're going to go for player order. Now again, player order is not adjusted in the first round because we've already done that during setup. So we're going to skip past the player order and we're going to go ahead and move past to the third action for the round, which is the part of the game where we're going to gain our resources. Now the start of the third action or third phase for the round, every single player is going to get resources based on how well they manage to move across the realms, what kind of basilica have been built, where their legions are, where their cards are, and what they managed to complete in the round in the game. But we have a nice handy reminder right here. It's going to show us that we're going to gain 1 dinar for every single road that we manage to build. Roads are these little circles, and when you build a road, you're going to place on top of this Roman numeral, and that Roman numeral represents how much dinar and how much stone it cost you to actually build that. I'll explain that when we get to that part of the action phase through all the actions we can take. But just understand that your roads are these little circles, these buildings right here are your forts, and this pawn represents where exactly you are in the game right now, and it also represents your influence when you're performing the actions. We'll get to that in just a little bit. Just understand you're going to get 1 dinar for every single road you built. You have up to 20 roads in the game, which means you can get up to $20 from your roads. Next thing you're going to get is for every single fort or city that you manage to build, you're going to have to make a decision. You're either going to take 2 gold for that city that you control, or you're going to take 1 stone for that city you control. Now there's one additional thing that you need to pay attention to, and that's the basilicas. Now the basilica can give extra resources to every player in that entire region, and a region is separated on the board. You can tell every region right here. This is one region, this is another region, this is one region, this is one other region. You can tell by the lines that separate all of them. But if one of these basilica is ever in a region, and there can only be 1 basilica per region, every one of these basilica can have an extra single bonus. Now understand the basilica cannot be built in Rome. Very few things can be built in SPQR itself. The players are forced to expand to start building things. Pretty much the only thing players can build in the beginning are roads and go to different locations. You pretty much want to be expanding out as quickly as possible because remember, building out and getting influence is how you're going to win the game. But they understand that these basilica, you have 1 in every single region, and every single basilica are going to give extra bonuses to any player. And I'll explain that in just a second. Don't want to jump ahead of myself. But for every fort you have, you need to decide if you want to take 2 dinar, if you want to take 1 stone. Now the nice thing is if you happen to have a city in a location right here with one of these basilica representing the stone, that means every city, as long as there are no hostile cities in that region, and a hostile city is represented by these tokens right here. I'll explain these in just a little bit, but as long as there's not one of these tokens in any one of the other cities in that region, it's not a hostile city. And that means that every single city in this region will produce either 2 stone or 2 gold. And you have the red basilica right here, which represents that every person who has at least 1 city in this region, again, as long as there's no hostile cities in the region, will get 1 influence. And again, that goes for all players. So if red happen to have this city, blue happen to have this city, and then the purple player happen to have this city, that means that every single one of these players is going to gain 1 influence on the influence track. And you simply track that on your influence track. Next thing we are going to have is we are going to have the gold basilica. Now the gold basilicas are just like the influence basilica. If you happen to have a city in a region with the gold basilica, every single player who has a city in that region, as long as there's no hostile cities in that region, is going to gain 5 gold. So I wanted to get ahead and show you that because that's going to influence if you want to take money or stone from every one of these cities, because you're also going to get money if there happens to be a basilica in that area. So make sure you factor that in. So again, just to run over this really quickly, 1 gold or 1 dinar for every single road you manage to build. Every city is either going to produce 2 gold or 1 stone, unless there has to be a stone basilica in that region. Then it's 2 gold or 2 stone itself. Every single red basilica, every city, if you have a city there, you'll get 1 influence just for having that city there, not per city. So if red happen to have 2 cities here, they're not going to gain 2 influence. It's just 1 if it happens to be 1 basilica there. And then finally, if you happen to have a city where there happens to be one of the gold basilicas, Every person who has at least one city in that region is going to gain an extra 5 gold. Again, not per city. The only one that's per city is the stone Basilica, and that gives you the option. If you have a city there, every one of your cities can produce either 2 gold or 2 stone. You need to make that choice. After you've done that, every single player is going to get a certain amount of deception cards based on their current influence. Now, if you look at your cohort board, you're going to see some nice little symbols and some nice reminders on the cohort board to help you remember the rules for the game. If you look over here, you can see that if your influence is 5 or less, you're going to gain 1 deception card. If your influence happens to be 6 to 9, you're going to gain 2 deception cards. If your influence happens to be 10, you're going to gain 3 deception cards. Now, you can never have more than 5 deception cards in your hand, so after you draw those cards in your hand, you look at your hand, discard down to 5 deception cards. They are going to go into the discard pile. Remember, at the end of every single round, the discard pile gets shuffled back in. So even though we have a lot of deception cards, you may start seeing these deception cards coming back in every single round depending on how you shuffle. So be ready for that. And know there's multiple copies of some of the deception cards, so that can help facilitate how these deception cards are going to go in. After we are done gaining all of our resources, we are going to go to the action part of the round. And the actions are going to occur in player order. Now, in player order, every single player is going to take all of their actions. This isn't like some other area control games where every person is going to take 1 action. Then we're going to come back to the first player and everybody is going to take 1 action in player order, and we're going to go through all of our actions. No, one single player takes all their actions. Then we go to the next player who takes all their actions. Next player takes all their actions, and then finally the next player takes all of their actions. Now, on a single player's turn, we have a bunch of actions that are available to us, and these actions are going to cost resources that we're going to spend. And then at the end of the turn, we need to pay for all of our resources, all of our legions, and all of our officers. Anything we can't pay for, we will lose. And remember, your actions also cost money. Building roads costs money. Building Basilica costs money. And paying for your legions and your officers also costs money, so make sure you're not overextending yourself on your turns. In player order, every single player is going to take their actions, like I said, and the actions you can take on your turn are going to be on this little reminder card that comes with the game. Now, this reminder card is going to tell you all the actions. It's double-sided, but both sides show the exact same thing. It's going to show the entire round for the player. Again, don't forget, you're going to take all of your actions before the next player gets to go. And the number of actions you get is based on the number of players in the game. And again, it's listed on the board right here. On a 2-player game, every single player gets 5 actions. In a 3- or 4-player game, every player gets 4 actions. In a 5-player game, every single player gets 3 of actions. On a player's turn, the actions we're going to take are decided by this board, and these are the actions you can take. And I'll go over every single one of these actions very quickly. The very first action a player can do is they can build a road. Now, the way you're going to build a road is you're going to look for one of these Roman numerals in a circle, and that's going to represent a road that you can build on and you can purchase. You cannot purchase any roads that lead to or from Rome because they are free. Nobody can control Rome ever, and nobody can place or buy roads that lead out of Rome immediately. They're already open, they're already available, and I'll explain when the movement comes up in just a second, but just understand you can never buy a road. The way you're going to buy these roads are with these Roman numerals, and that Roman numeral is the cost for that road in gold or dinar and in stone. Remember, stone are these gray cubes, and your dinar is your personal money reserves. And don't forget, you need to save money to pay for your legions and your officers. So don't go hog wild on exploding across the board, because you're not going to have enough money to pay for your resources and you'll be left with nothing. And it is possible to lose all your legions if you cannot pay for them. You pay for all of them, whether they're used or not. So watch your monetary resources. Now, the way you're going to build a road is you can only build a road connected to the location where your player pawn happens to be. So for example, I could build a road right here if I was red, and the only cost to me would be 2 stone, and then I'd spend 2 dinar. Once I've done that, that costs me 1 action, and I can simply build a road right there. Now remember, at the start of the next round when I gain my resources, that's now 2 gold I'm going to make, and that doesn't even count the money I'm getting for the cities I control. Now, it's very important to build roads when we start explaining movement, but that's just a simple action for building a road. There's one other cost that goes with building a road, because it's not built by aliens in space. Your legions and your wonderful followers, the people you have influence are the ones who are helping you build the roads, and that means you need to send your legions out there to do the work. Now, the amount of legions you need to send out there is equal to the gold or stone that you spent on this road, and which is the cost listed right here. So to build this road, it cost me 2 dinar, it costs me 2 stone, and it's also going to cost me 2 legions. So I will remove them from my available legions up here, and I'll put them over here in this section of the board which represents building. Notice I only have 3 legions left to do actions, so I have to be very, very careful. And that's my first action of the 4 I get in a 4-player game. So that's the first action, which is building roads. The next action you can do is you can move. Now you can only move along roads that have been built. Not roads built by you, roads that have been built. You can move along other players' roads as long as you pay that player for every single one of their roads that you use. And there's a cost for using other players' roads. Using your roads is free. Using other player roads costs money, and you can do a combination between your roads and their roads. So I can simply move along, well, let's just say I happen to be in this city right here. Yes, you can be in a city you don't control, so understand that is something you can do. You don't have to be in control of a city to be in it. But I can move from here along this route right here, come all the way through here, come through this road of this other player, and end up in the city. And that's one move action. It was one complete move action, but since I've used another player's road, there's going to be a cost involved in this. Now I'm going to throw out a couple roads here really quick just to show you how these costs can start to escalate, and you have to pay these costs to the player when you use their roads. So just to show you how this works, let's go ahead and show you exactly what would happen if all these roads had been built. And let's say we started off in the city. So for one action, we are going to move from this city all the way to the city. So this part of the action would be free movement, moving along this road. This part of the action right here, moving all the way through this road right here, we'd have to pay yellow player 1 dinar to use their city or their road. And then if we went, let me make a better example right there, which is what I've meant to do. So once we move to this city, we will move along this road. We now must pay the blue player 1 dinar, which will get us to this city. And then if we want to get all the way to this city, we must pay the blue player 1 more dinar. So to move from this city all the way to the city, and yes, you can occupy other players' cities. You can attack other players' cities, and hostile cities matter. I'll explain that in just a second. But to move all the way from here to here, free along my own road, I then had to pay the yellow player 1 dinar, blue player 1 dinar, and blue player 1 more dinar, for a total of 3 dinar. 2 went to blue, 1 went to yellow. Now you have to be very, very careful when you're moving from city to city, because if you ever enter a hostile city, and hostile cities are represented by orange or by red, depending just how hostile these cities are. And I'll explain how cities become hostile, but if you ever move into a hostile city, you must immediately stop your move, and that action is over. Then you must spend another action to attack that city. If you don't have any actions left over, you are not allowed to move into that city, because it takes 1 action to move there, and then you have to spend another action to attack. Remember, it requires you to spend 1 of your actions to attack any hostile cities. Hostile cities are represented by orange and by red. Hostile cities are not represented by the other players. Again, you can move through other cities by the other players, other roads by the other players, but once you enter a hostile city, your movement action is done, finished. You must now spend an additional action to attack that city, and if you fail at attacking that city, you must go back to the last city you left. The next action you can do on your turn is the scouting action. Now with scouting, you're going to send some of your available legions, up to 3 of them, to any city that happens to be connected to the current location your player pawn happens to be in. Again, this is one of those actions, just like building roads, you can only complete by being connected to your current location your player pawn happens to be in. Remember, you can only build roads next to the location of your current pawn. You can only send scouts into a city connected to your current player pawn. Now there's a couple different reasons you can send scouts to a city. Generally speaking, you're only going to send scouts to a hostile city because they're going to help you in Conquest. We'll cover Conquest in just a moment, but understand that you can also send scouts to a non-hostile city. Generally speaking, when in those cases, you're only going to send 1 of your legions to that location. And generally speaking, it's only because of a certain deception card that happens to be in the deck. That's going to be kind of a denial tactic versus other players. And again, I don't want to ruin any spoils. Just understand there are some cards that may make you want to do that from a strategic standpoint. But generally speaking, you're only going to scout a city that is currently hostile. And again, to scout a hostile city, you just send anywhere of 1, 2, or 3 of your legions to that location. Now, there can never be more than 3 scouts from any player total at that location. So that means that blue happened to currently have a scout at that location, and yellow currently had a scout at that location. That means that red can only send 1 scout to that location. There can never be more than 3 scouts at a location. And why would you want to send scouts to locations? Well, because we're now going to talk about Conquest. Now to go over the conquest action, again, conquest is an action. You must spend one action to conquer a location. And to conquer a location, you simply move your player pawn into that location, and then you do the conquest action. Now there's a couple different ways you can actually move your pawn into a city. You can do the move action, and that allows you to move your player pawn into that location. Additionally, anytime you build a road, you get a free move action into the next city that's on the other side of the road. You can do that as part of your road building action. You don't have to do that. You're more than welcome to build roads all around your current location, but just remember, when you build a road, as part of that road building action, you do get a free move into the next city. It doesn't cost you a move action as part of the building action itself. But generally speaking, when you move into a city, there's going to be either one of three statuses for the city. The city is either going to be a normal, friendly, non-hostile city, or the city is going to be a hostile city, or a city is going to be a mobilized city. And I'll explain all the differences to that in just a second. Let's go ahead and do a combat here versus a non-hostile city. Anytime you do combat versus a non-hostile city, all you need to do is just be in that location and then do a conquest action. To do a conquest action for a non-hostile city, you just must discard 3 attack power worth of attack power, or equal to the size of the city. So this city requires 3 attack power. This one requires 2 attack power, and they go all the way up to 5 attack power for the more powerful cities. And the way you gain attack power is you spend your legions to go ahead and gain attack power. You can also gain attack power by spending deception cards. You can also gain attack power by hiring these officers. So we're going to bypass the hiring officer part just for a minute and pretend that we managed to hire this officer right here. This officer can be used for 2 attack. This officer can be used for 2 build power. He also has a special power that is always running. Now understand that some of these officers also have their own special powers that you have to actually spend as an action to do, but we'll explain that when we get to actually purchasing officer. I don't want to get ahead of myself just yet. But just for this little bit of example, let's just say that the red player currently has an officer. So to conquer this city right here and put one of my forts there, I just must have a total of 3 attack power. I can simply place my officer pawn right here. That's 2 attack power. Spend 1 more pawn. That's a total of 3 attack power. Guess what? I now control that city. I am going to add a fort to that location. Now, in the earlier rounds, when the round structure is still on the gray color, nothing else happens except for you're going to gain a couple bits of influence. And I'll explain that in just a second. Let me circle to back to that in just a second. So on rounds 1 and 2 in a 3 and up player game, nothing else is going to happen with the outside cities. Once we get to round 3 in a 3 or more player game, or once we get to round 4 in a 2 player game, anytime we conquer a city, all adjacent non-conquered cities are going to gain 1 level hostility. That means a non-hostile city is going to turn hostile, and against all cities that are connected by roads, whether those roads are built or if the roads happen to not be built, all adjacent cities are going to gain 1 level of hostility. It's just something that happens. Now, conquered cities never gain hostility levels because they're conquered. You control them. But once we get to those rounds where it matters, and it's red here so you don't forget, red for hostile. Just understand when you conquer a city, all adjacent cities, whether the roads are built or unbuilt, as long as they're connected, are going to gain 1 level hostility. Now what happens when another city gets conquered, let's say I conquer this city, and a city is already hostile, any city now is going to turn mobilized now once it gets to that point. So you got to be smart on how you're conquering the cities, because in the later rounds, you're going to start making all the adjacent cities very, very hostile. Hostile cities are difficult to conquer. Mobilized cities are extremely hard to conquer because we're going to have to start rolling the dice. I'll explain that when we go ahead and attack the city, and that's a good time to start explaining how all these scouts are going to work. So let's go ahead and back everything up here and show you how to do a conquest versus a hostile city, and then we'll do a conquest versus a mobilized city, which makes it even more challenging. Now to conquer a hostile city and a mobilized city is when we're going to start rolling the dice to figure out exactly the total strength we need to get rid of to actually attack that city. And this is going to be one of those times where you're generally going to have the potential to not have enough power to take out the cities, and you're going to have to go back to the city you left. Generally speaking, unless you fail at math, you're never going to fail at conquering a peaceful city unless you just can't add to 3 or whatever it is, and that should never happen. And if it does, put down the vodka. You've had too much. You should not be playing the game right now. So to conquer these other cities that have been hostile or mobilized, though, you're going to start rolling the dice to figure out how to conquer these cities. So any hostile city has 1 sword to represent. You're going to roll 1 die. Any city that is mobilized has 2 swords to represent the fact that you are going to roll 2 dice to figure out the total strength of that city. Now, scouts are going to influence it a little bit differently, and I'll explain those in just a moment. Don't want to get ahead of myself here, but the scouts will make a huge difference. So, if I want to attack this city right here, and it is a hostile city, I'm going to roll 1 die, and I'm going to add that number to the total strength of that city. Now, this die goes from 1 to 4. There's 1, 1, 1, 4, 2 2s, and 2 3s. So understand that the average is you're going to gain 2 to 3 to the strength of the city. So you can kind of do the mental math and figure out how hostile a city is going to be. Once you roll the die, you're going to add that to the total strength of the city, and that's the total amount of strength you must put forward to conquer that city. In this case, looking at the red player, if I rolled a 3, the city has a strength of 3. I only have 3 more points of strength I can put forward. I can't conquer unless I have some deception cards. Guess what? I failed. I must now go back to the city I just left. But wait. This is where the scouts start coming in. So when we have a scout, scouts are going to influence things just a little bit differently. When there's scouts at a location, you're going to roll 1 extra die for every scout you control, but you're going to add 1 to your strength for every scout total at the location. Now, that's a very important distinction. You roll 1 extra die for every scout you control, but your attack strength is the total of all the scouts at the location, even the scouts you don't control. So in this case, since I have 1 red scout there, I'm going to roll 2 dice instead of just the 1 die, and then I get to pick the die I want to keep. So I'm going to roll the dice, and let's say I got a 1 and I got a 3. Obviously, I'm going to pick the 1 because I don't want the city to be that strong. Now, my total attack strength is 3 because there's scouts of 3 already there. So since this is a 3 strength city, I only need 1 more strength to conquer it. So I would simply take these 3 scouts and they would be done for. And then I put 1 more strength towards it. That's the total of 4. 3 plus 1 is 4. I would conquer that city. And then I can put my fort out there and I get to go, hooray, that's 1 more victory point for my team. Now, this is where we have to remember a little bit of extra math and a little bit of extra stuff. My scout that's part of the combat is going to go in my spent combat area, and every single player who had a scout involved in that battle is going to gain 1 influence for free, and they're going to gain that influence for free for being part of that battle. So that is a nice little bonus for them, and that spent scout actually is going to be available for them on their turn. It's not going to go in the spent location. Sorry, my little error there. The red player scout, though, will go in the spent combat location, plus any additional legions they had to send forward to get the total strength. Now, again, we're also forgetting 1 little bonus. I'm going to cover that bonus in just a second. I haven't forgotten a little rule here yet. Now, let's go ahead and explain how it works when we have a mobilized city. And let's just say we have 1 scout there from us, and we have 1 scout there from the purple player. Now, the way this is going to work now, it's a little bit more complex, but not really. It just seems a little weird when you're first looking at it. So when you have a mobilized city, it's going to get 2 sets of dice rolls, not just 1. It's not 2 dice, it's 2 sets of dice rolls. Why is that important? Because remember, you're going to add every one of your scouts. For every single one of your scouts, you're going to add another die to the roll. So let's say we decided to attack the city, and we're not a cheater, so let's build a road right there. So we had a legal move into the city. This is a 2 strength mobilized city. So it has 2 strength, and it's going to roll the dice twice. But I have 2 scouts in this location, so that means I get to add 2 dice to my roll and pick the best one. So it's 2 swords, that means we get to roll the dice twice. And it's going to total that up together, so it's going to become very, very strong. So we have 1 die for the city, 2 dice for my scouts. I'm going to roll all 3 of these dice, and then I'm going to pick the lowest one. Obviously, I'm going to pick the 2. And then since this is a mobilized city, we have to do this again. So it's a second set of dice rolls, not total. Don't roll them all together. 2 separate dice rolls. So my scouts are going to work twice in my favor. So here's 1 dice for the city, 2 more dice for my scouts. I'm going to roll those dice, and I'm going to pick the lowest number now. Now at this point, I'm going to add this total to the total strength of the city. So 2 plus 1 is 3. A 2 strength city is a total of 5. Well, I have 3 here from scouts. Remember, 2 from mine, 1 more from that, so I only have to discard 2 more scouts. And guess what? I have now conquered that city, and I'm gaining more and more victory points. These scouts have done their job. They're going to go to my spent location. This purple will go back to the available here, and guess what? Purple is going to gain 1 influence for assisting me in attacking that city as a nice bonus for that player. Now, here's one other thing I have not explained for the Conquest yet, and this is nice, quick, and dirty, and simple. Whenever you conquer a non-hostile city, you gain 1 influence. Anytime you conquer a hostile city, you're going to gain 2 influence. And anytime you conquer a mobilized city, you are going to gain 3 points of influence. So 1 for regular, 2 for hostile, 3 for mobilized. So just understand you're going to gain influence yourself, plus other players will gain influence as they happen to have scouts those locations, helping you to take out those cities. And remember, influence is victory points. Influence allows you to play cards, and we'll get to that in just a second. The next action you can do is build a Basilica. Now to build a Basilica is going to cost you 5 dinar and 5 stone. You simply pay the cost and you add the Basilica to the region. Now there can never be more than 1 Basilica per region. Remember, the Basilicas are going to give bonuses to every single person who has a city in that same region, as long as there is not a hostile city in that location. But the city in that region happens to be mobilized or hostile, the Basilica is not going to give a bonus to anybody until the hostility has been taken care of, whether it's through card play or through conquest or whatever it happens to be. But that's the only way Basilica is going to give a bonus. Once that problem has been taken care of, that Basilica is going to give us a bonus, whether it's going to be influence, whether it happens to be stone for the cities, or whether it happens to be gold. Every single player has at least 1 city in that region. Just understand there can never be a Basilica in SPQR. They have to be built out across the world, and there can never be more than 1 Basilica per region. 5 gold, 5 stone, whoever pays for it gains that Basilica into that region, but it can give a bonus to everybody. But that's also going to be possibly one of the victory conditions, so watch what the other players are doing. Next thing we have is we have the ability to sail. Now you notice that a lot of these cities have 2 tridents on them, and every city that has 2 tridents on it happens to be a port city. If your player pawn happens to be in one of those port cities, for the price of 3 low dinar, you can leave that city and enter any other city on the board that happens to have 2 tridents on it also. The trick is, when you enter the new city, you must pay another 3 dinar. Here's the additional trick. If you enter a city controlled by another player, you must pay that 3 dinar to them. So remember, to leave a city, to leave a port, costs you 3 dinar. To enter the next port costs you another 3 dinar. If it's controlled by another player, you pay that to that player. If it's not controlled by anybody, you pay that 3 dinar directly to the bank. That's how you sail. The next thing we have is the recruit action, and the recruit action uses the officers and also recruiting legions. And the legions are something we need, because as you see, we need those legions for doing actions such as combat, conquest, and also building roads. So we need those legions. But watch it, because we have to pay for them. But the way we're going to do a recruit action is, when you do a recruit action, you're going to do one of 2 different possible recruit actions. You are either going to recruit an officer, or you're going to recruit up to 3 more legions. Now you can never have more than 8 legions on your board, and don't forget you have to pay for them. And any legions you recruit immediately come available access for you to use them immediately. So you can possibly spend a whole bunch of legions, do a recruit action, get more legions, and then do some more actions with those additional legions you get. Just remember, you can't spend and recruit legions that have already been used. You're basically recruiting legions that are in your outside resources available for you to purchase at this time. Now the other thing you can do as a recruit action is you can start recruiting officers. Now every single one of these officers has 2 requirements to purchase them. The first thing that they're required in the upper left hand corner is the minimum amount of influence you must possess. Not spend, but you must possess that minimum amount of influence to buy that officer and have them join your army. Additionally, they're also going to have a cost, which is going to be modified by this cost down here on the bottom. So the cost in the upper right hand corner plus the cost of their current locations will be the total cost to go ahead and purchase that officer into your army. So to get this officer right here, it's going to cost you 5 gold or 5 dinar to add him to your crew. Here's the trick though. You can only have 1 officer on your cohort unless you happen to have 6 or more influence. If you have 6 or more influence, you can get a second officer, but if your influence ever drops below that magic 6 number, you must discard that officer and they're removed from the game back to the deck, and they're going to be shuffled back in for a later time. So make sure once you have that second officer, you're keeping enough money to keep him paid, or also enough influence, because if you can't pay for either, you're going to lose access to that officer. So it's very, very important to make sure you're watching your resources at all times. Once you have spent your 1 action to buy that 1 officer, the officer on the far right is going to cycle down to the left. If you ever forget, there's some arrows to help remind you. and then you're simply going to fill in the next spot. Now remember, it costs you 1 action to recruit, and all these actions I've described you can perform multiple times on a turn, just as long as you don't spend more actions than you have available to you. So you can recruit multiple officers, multiple legions, do multiple conquests, multiple movements, multiple road building. Just remember, you only have a certain amount of actions, whether it has to be 5 in a 2-player game, 4 in a 3 or 4-player game, or 3 in a 5-player game. That's all the actions you have available to you. Additionally, when you're hiring these officers, you'll notice that there's a little spot right here as a nice friendly reminder. Before you hire an officer, you can spend 3 dinar to discard all 3 of the officers who are currently in the stack and draw out a fresh hand of 3 brand new officers, and then still as part of the same action itself, you can actually still buy an officer out of the stack. Again, paying the cost as long as you meet the minimum requirements for minimum amount of influence you currently have. Again, you don't spend that influence, you just must have that minimum amount of influence, spend the gold cost based on the location, any cost that's on the upper right hand corner, and then that is something you can do before you hire officers. Now it's very important to do that because some of these officers do have some special powers, and some of them can be a denial tactic because some of these officers are also part of a victory condition. If you're seeing a player starting to work towards that victory condition, you can do that denial tactic, stop them from filling out one of their mandates. So just refresh, go over this again. You can use a recruit action to hire up to 3 legions. It costs you 1 dinar per legion you hire, or you can go ahead and hire one of these officers as long as you have the minimum amount of influence and spend the cost upper right hand corner plus the cost for their current location. Once you do the purchase, you purchase the first one, we're just going to simply slide over, move them on over, and then we're going to go ahead and refill it, and we're going to take care of it like that. You can never have more officers than the 2 in your location. If you already have 2 and you want to buy another officer, you're simply going to discard whichever one you discard and replace it. This one will go into the discard pile. That's free to do. You can do that anytime, but if your influence ever drops below this magic line right here, you're going to lose access to that officer. Also, we're going to have to pay for these officers, but we'll explain that in just a moment. Just one more thing to explain about officers. You notice that some officers have a little slot right here that says, as an action, you can put your pawn over on top of that location and take that action. Now, every one of these officers has potentially up to 3 things you can do with every one of these officers. The first thing you do with an officer is you can spend your pawn to gain their attack strength. Second thing you do is spend the pawn to get their building strength. Or in the case of some of these officers have that special power, you can spend your pawn right there to use that action of that officer. Now there's no symbol right there for a pawn to go in that location. That simply means that the power of that officer is permanent. It's always in effect as long as that officer is part of your cohort. That's how you do the recruiting action. The next thing to do is explain one final thing on your turn. For every single action you don't spend on your turn, as your final action, again this has to be your final action because once you do this you can't do anything else at all, but you can burn all your remaining actions, and for every action you burn you can gain 2 dinar. So if it's a 4 action game, you literally as your first thing you can do is take no actions, burn all 4 of your actions and gain 8 dinar if you really need the money really badly. Or you can do 2 actions, whatever they happen to be, then burn your last 2 actions to gain 4 dinar. Just understand that burning your actions as the preparation step has to be the last thing you do on your turn. Once you've done your very last action on your turn, and there's one other thing you can do on your turn, I'll explain that in just a second, but I want to explain the very last thing you need to do on your turn. The very last thing you can do on your turn that you have to do to finish out your turn is you have to pay for all of your legions and all of your officers. Anything you do not pay for is going to be discarded and go back into your supply over here. Now there are a few cards that are very nice that say you don't have to pay for unspent legions, but if you don't have that officer and you don't have that power, you must pay for all your legions, even the legions you didn't use on your turn. Every single legion that you have, you're going to have to pay 1 dinar for. And again, if you don't pay for it, you're simply going to lose it. And after you pay for them, you put them back in their stack right here in the track to signify you have them available for you on your next turn. Your first officer is going to cost you 2 dinar, and your second officer is going to cost you 3 dinar. Now you can do any combination you want. For example, if we only have this measly 10 dinar left over, and we really want this officer really badly here, we could discard this officer, pay 3 gold for this officer right here, and then we would have to get rid of this legion right here because we only have 7 dinar left. 7 dinar plus 3 is the full 10. That's all the money we have left over. Again, any legions you don't spend to, go back in your resources that you have to buy at a later turn, and any officers you don't pay for, you're also going to lose. Now that's not the only thing you can do. There is actually a free action you can do on your turn. On your turn, every player can play 1 deception card for free. And remember, you can have a hand of up to 5 deception cards. You can play additional deception cards, but every additional deception card is going to cost a progressively more expensive amount of your influence. The second deception card you want to play in your turn costs 1 influence. The third costs 2. The fourth costs 3. The fifth costs 4. Again, you can't go past 5 because you never have more than 5 deception cards. But that is going to cost you your influence points. And understand some of these cards also have an influence cost, so that can be combined. So if a card costs you 1 influence to spend, and it's your second deception card you're going to play in the turn, it's going to cost you 2 influence. You can never go below 1, so if you only have 1 influence, guess what? You can't spend any more of those deception cards. It doesn't cost you an action, but it definitely costs you influence to do so. And speaking of influence, there's also a way to buy influence besides just conquering cities. Remember, we get influence from playing cards, we can get influence from conquering normal, hostile, and mobilized cities, but we can also go to Rome at any time, and anytime we want. If we happen to be in Rome, we can buy influence, and it's going to cost us amount of gold based on the level of influence we want to go to, but we can only go up 1 level influence. What that means is if I'm currently at 6 influence, I can spend 7 dinar to go to 7 influence for 1 action. And then I can spend another action to spend 8 more dinar to go up to 8 influence. If I'm all the way down on 1 influence, I can spend 2 dinar to go all the way up to 2 influence. That's going to cost me 1 action. After all the players have had a chance to take all of their actions or gain money for any actions they don't want to use by using prepare step, it's going to come to the end of the round. During the end of the round, any cards in the deception discard pile, again the discard pile only, are going to be shuffled back into this deck. Now when I do the playthrough video, I'm going to try to show you as many of these deception cards as possible, which means I'm not actually going to shuffle them back in. I'm going to stick them on the bottom. Understand I'm playing wrong, but I'm simply doing this because I want to show you as many of these deception cards as possible. Because in the rules, all the discarded deception cards are going to be shuffled back into the stack. So understand that's the way the rules are. And I'll remind you during the gameplay video that I'm breaking the rules for that very specific reason, is I want to show you a large variety of these cards to give you an idea of how these cards can play. Now that will bring about the end of the round, and then we're going to move on to the next round. Now remember, there's 2 actions we actually skipped earlier, so let's go ahead and cover those really quick. So the first thing I discussed that we passed was the fortune part of every single round. So the fortune start of every single round, the first thing we're going to do at the start of the round is we're going to advance the round track. As long as the round track is still in gray in a 3, 4, or 5 player game, this is rounds 1 and 2. In a 2-player only game, it's still considered a gray turn in round 3. And there's this nice little reminder right here. It shows a 2, a player right here, and a little bit of gray. So understand a 2-player game, even round 3 is considered a gray round. But as we advance this track at the start of every fortune round, once we hit the very first red turn, that means we are going to start having fortune rounds, which are events. During the fortune round, once we get to these red turns, then each individual fortune turn is going to cause us to draw an event card. These event cards are in effect for the entire round, and they are completely in effect for the entire round until the point where we shuffle that discard pile back into the deception deck. So these events can happen every single round once we get to round 3, 4, 5, and on in a 3+ player game. So understand that these are going to randomize, add a little bit of variety to the game, and change up how things are going to happen. The next thing that we skipped up was player order. Now the way player order works is at the start of the player order turn, all the players are going to be going off of the round track, and then in player order, players have to buy their position on the player order track. Now remember, player order is going to be from left to right, and to buy these various different higher level locations costs you an amount of dinar listed on it. So if I want to ensure I'm going to go first, I pay 8 dinar, and you cannot be bumped. That guarantees I happen to be the first player. So I could, if I wanted to, look at all the other players. If nobody has if nobody has 5 or more dinar, I can simply take this 3, pay the 3 dinar, and take that spot because I know nobody else has 5 or more dinar. So you can math it out a little bit. But basically in player order, players are going to pay for that spot, or they're going to take the last far right available free location on the board. So that does mean that the turn order is going to keep cycling and spinning back and forth. The players keep playing cheap and not bidding for the turn order. So we're going to do this in player order. So let's say red decided they don't want to pay anything, so they're going to go all the way to the right. Let's say blue wants to pay 1 dinar, so they pay 1 dinar to the bank. Yellow doesn't want to pay anything, so they go right here. And then finally purple decides that they're going to pay 3 dinar to make sure they go first. That is what the player order will be for this turn. Now understand, in a 5-player and in a 5-player only game, if the 4 players ahead of you all take the free spaces, you can still, as the 5th player, get the first spot, because remember, we're going to go in order, but you don't have to pay the 1 dinar. So players can't force you to pay a cost to get that spot. And that's in a 5-player only game only. All other player accounts, players have to pay for whatever spot they happen to take. So again, the basic flow of the game is at the start of the round, we're going to advance the turn track, we're going to bid for player order, players are going to gain all their resources, players are going to take their actions, then we're going to recycle the discard pile, the fortune event is going to end, and then we're going to start the next round. The game is going to play on and on like this until one player manages to get 3 of their mandate cards completed, well, whether it's the open mandates, all 3 mandates, or they get their personal mandates, or any combination of that. Once 3 mandates have been completed by 1 player, the game is going to come to an end. At the end of that round, it doesn't matter if 1 player ends the game, we're still going to finish out that round, which means the other players can still possibly get actions. Once that round is finished out, we're going to add up all the victory points. Players can get victory points based on their current influence level. They're going to gain 1 victory point for every single city they control, and they're going to get 2 victory points for every mandate they manage to complete. Whoever has the most victory points is going to be the grand winner of the game. Now, there is no tiebreaker in this game, so make sure that if you're ending the game, you're ending the game because you think you can win it, because there are no tiebreakers. There's no tiebreakers in war. It's whoever comes on top is the grand winner of the game. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you have enjoyed this video series. If you have any comments or questions, make sure you leave them down in the YouTube comments below. I'll be sure to answer them as quickly as I can. You can also feel free to email me at off-the-shelf-board-game-reviews. That's otsbgr@gmail.com. Be sure to answer emails as quickly as I can. If you enjoyed this video, video series, click that like button, click that subscribe button, and as always, thanks for watching.